Greetings, and welcome to YouTube video number 5. I want to thank everybody who's been watching the videos and welcome any new subscribers, any new people viewing this video. One thing that I really want to focus on today, because we got a lot of information we're going to talk about, but one thing I want to focus on is how important it is to know your past, the truth of your past, trace it to your current, so you can understand where the future's headed, especially if we don't make any changes. The enemy would love for us to not know the truth of the past. The enemy would love for us not to make any changes because there's nothing new under the sun. The enemy would love to use fear and our emotional strongholds to manipulate us so we cannot be the light and the hope that God wants us to be as the church and as Christians. You can look at the previous videos and understand what our job description is as Christians. We should love people every day. We should want fairness, just like God created his Edenic view in Eden. We should infiltrate the earth, the world, to be the way God wants us to be, so we can be imagers of God. You can really get into detail with that in the previous videos. Okay, let's get started for today because we've got a lot of information to cover. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world, even more than countries that we perceive as having less freedom than us, such as Russia and China. In Germany, for every 93 people out of every 100,000 people are incarcerated. So in Germany, 93 out of every 100,000 people are incarcerated. That's the rate of people incarcerated in Germany. Guess what? In America, out of every 100,000 people, 750 people are incarcerated. That's 8 times more than Germany. The shocking thing that we're really going to get into, a majority of the people in America who are incarcerated are black and brown people. Interesting. Should not be surprising, knowing our past. Slavery, Jim Crow, the government, the judicial system, the penal system, what it's founded on in America. Based on the previous videos, it's founded on racism and injustice. So that shouldn't be surprising. But we're going to dig into it and see how we can go back into our not so distant past and see how all of this came about. Okay? America imprisoned a large percent of its black and brown population. More than any other country, America imprisons racial and ethnic minorities on a larger scale than any other country in the world. America imprisons more black people on a percentage than South Africa did during the height of apartheid. Okay? Like I said, this should be no surprise if we know the truth of America and its history and how we were founded. This racial disparity cannot be explained by rates of drug use or the rate of drug crimes. It's been proven in America that people of all color sell and use illegal drugs. You cannot tell that if you visit our prison systems. The majority of our prison system is black and brown people. But it's been proven the rate of drug crimes is equal, black, brown, white, or whoever. So why is our prisons, majority of our prisons, black and brown people? We're going to get into that. Okay. Let's go back to the not so distant future. During the 1980s and 1990s, Democratic and Republican politicians leaned heavily on racial stereotypes. Crackheads, crack babies, super predators, welfare queens to mobilize public support for the war on drugs. Get tough on crime. It became President Ronald Reagan's political slogan. Back in the 1980s and 90s, both Republicans and Democrats leaned heavily on racial stereotypes. Now, during the 1980s and 1990s, this is very important, drug use, illegal drug use, was not a priority in a lot of communities. In a lot of state and local communities, drug use, illegal drug use, was not a priority. A lot of these states and local communities, they said, hey, okay, I hear what you're saying, but in our communities, we're working on major crimes, rapes, murders, theft, auto theft, and stuff like that. That's the priority we have in our communities, okay? So now, what happened was the war on drugs fell into the federalism category. Let's define federalism. Governments are set up that you have a hierarchy, basically. So the local states, the local governments, they're responsible for defining and controlling criminal behavior. So the states are saying, hey, okay, got it. We're responsible. So this is what we're focused on, these major crimes. Theft, auto theft, murders, suicides, things like that. But the federal government is saying, oh, we want you to focus on war on drugs. So now the federal government was at a dilemma. How do we get these local, state, and local governments to focus on war on drugs and war on drug crimes and not what they want to focus on? Okay? The federal government came up with an answer. Cash. They would offer huge cash grants to any state or local enforcement department if they focus on war on drugs. We're going to really get into defunding the police and what that means and what it should really mean. Okay? So huge cash grants were offered to any state or local law enforcement agency if they focus on war on drugs. In 1988, at the command of the Reagan administration, Congress revised the program that provides federal aid to law enforcement. Okay? It was designed to encourage every federal grant recipient to focus on the war on drugs. This is key. Millions of dollars in federal aid was offered to state and local enforcement agencies that were willing to wage the war on drugs. Almost immediately, federal dollars began to flow in. Now, law enforcement agencies across the country had to compete for funding, equipment, and training. By the late 1990s, an overwhelmingly majority of the states had tons, cash, millions, thousands of dollars available. And now, with all this cash and money, a strong military component was used as the war on drugs operation. According to the Cato Institute, in 1997 alone, the Pentagon handed over 1.2 million pieces of military equipment to local police departments. Between January 1997 and October 1999, the federal government handed over to states and local police departments, they handed over 253 6-7 passenger airplanes, UH-60 Black Hawk, UH-1 Huey helicopters, 181 grenade launchers. One retired police chief in New Haven, Connecticut told the New York Times, I was offered tanks and bazookas, anything I wanted. In barely a decade, the war on drugs went from a political slogan to an actual war funded by the federal government and enticed state and local police departments to wage the war on drugs. And if they did it, they've got millions of dollars of equipment, training, and cash. Let's talk about SWAT teams. In the 1960s, SWAT teams were developed across the country in most major cities. The SWAT teams were made and created mainly for hijackings, police, prison breaks, and things of that sort. Hijackings, prison escape, hostage situations. All that changed in the 1980s. Local law enforcement had access to all this cash. So what they did, they used all this cash, they used all the equipment that they got from the federal government, millions of dollars worth, to focus and channel to their SWAT departments. Now these SWAT agencies, they were militarized. Now what they did, they were used for war on drugs. They would invade schools, they would have all their gear and stuff on, helicopters, all that. You've seen it in movies, if you think about it. Back in those times, the shows you saw on TV, these police officers or federal agencies in airplanes with their gear on, machine guns, going into buildings and everything else. So it changed. Now what did this do? Because of the federal government giving millions of dollars cash and military equipment, now your state and your local police departments switch from community policing to military policing. Okay? In 1981, the President Reagan persuaded Congress to pass the Military Cooperations with Law Empowerment Act. Now, local police departments, state police departments had access to military bases, research, weaponry, and other military equipment they needed for war on drugs. The incentive programs worked. Drug arrests skyrocketed as SWAT teams swept through urban housing projects. Highway patrol agencies organized drug units on the freeways, and stop and frisk programs were set loose on the streets. Now let's think about that. State and local police departments, they got access to huge grants from the federal government, equipment from the federal government, military equipment for the federal government, and they were in competitions with all these other states and police departments across the country. But if they could show that they were waging a war on drugs, they would get all this money coming in. So they had to show. How do you show it? Your arrest records. You have to show people are going to jail. You have to show, hey, I'm using the money. Look, I'm using your tanks. I'm using whatever you've given me. I'm using these helicopters. And look, my drug arrest rate records show a major increase. So, hey, great, you'll get more money next year. Where do you think these prison booms and these arrests were coming from? Black and brown people. Okay? Now, Jim Crow, there's a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And she titles in her book, it's called Finders Keepers. What we're going to title this next topic is called Forfeiture Drug Laws. Now, as we just said, arrest records were going up. These state and local police departments had cash flowing in. They created SWAT teams and redirected their SWAT teams to reinforce the drug war. They had a lot of military equipment, war equipment. Now, as if that wasn't enough, in 1984, Congress amended the federal law. And what it did, it allowed law enforcement, state and local enforcement agencies were granted the authority to keep 80% of the cash and assets they seize when waging war on drugs. Okay, let's break that down. Basically what that means is a police officer could go anywhere and say, hey, I have suspicion, does not need burden of proof, I have suspicion that you are using your house, your vehicles, and everything to sell or elicit illegal drugs. Now, those are seized. Those are seized property, cash, and assets. They can take all of that. Now the burden of proof is on the person they're accusing don't need burden of proof. It's on them to defend themselves and say, no, I'm not doing that. So these are called drug forfeiture laws. So what happened with the drug forfeiture laws is 80% of them went uncontested because people didn't have the money or the resources to fight and battle in court. Law fees, court fees, and all of that. So they couldn't do it. So police department, needless to say, police department's budget went up tremendously because whatever they seized or suspected, they got 80% of that. So you can imagine how much that increased the state and local police departments. Okay. Between 1988 and 1992, it was proven that 80% of the people that fell under this drug forfeiture law went uncontested. They just walked away from property. They walked away from cars. If they had a house, they went into foreclosure. Of course, the police departments were able to keep all of that. Okay. Now, a lot of us, the public, we are not intimately involved in law enforcement. So a lot of us will think back, and the ignorance of that is to the advantage of the enemy. Because we'll sit and think, oh, all of this had to work. These drug forfeiture laws had to work. And you would like to think that the kingpins of the illegal drug sales, the big shots, the bosses making the millions of dollars, we would like to think, hey, we got some of those guys. But the truth is, under the drug forfeiture laws, people are allowed to use their assets to buy freedom. So if you're one of the kingpins who's got a lot of money, you could use your assets. Hey, okay, look, let's bargain. Let's plea bargain here. Let me buy my freedom. It was proven by reports that, especially in the state of Massachusetts, they did an investigation by a journalist, and they found out that an average payment of $50,000 in drug profits on a 6.3-year reduction in your sentence for dealers. Also, while agreements of $10,000 or more bought elimination of reduction of drug traffic charges in almost 3/4 of such cases. So the people who had access, the people who had money on the bad side of the war on drugs, depending if you're saying that's the bad side, were the people that were selling and soliciting drugs. They were able to buy their freedom under these drug forfeiture laws. But what happened to the small-time dealers? They were the ones that were locked up. They were the brown and black people that were locked up in jail, and that's what the war on drugs did in the 1980s and the 1990s. So, federal drug forfeiture laws are one reason why state and federal prisons now confine large numbers of men and women who had relatively minor roles in drug distribution networks, but few of their bosses. So, these are some of the things, the truth that we need to know and we need to learn. Because these are the things the enemy does not want us to know. And if you look through here and listen to all of this, you will see that some of these tricks is what the enemy is using today to lock people up. Now, what we're going to get into in our next video is what happens after you get locked up. We're going to talk about plea bargaining, how harsh some of the laws are, and how the government, the prosecuting attorney, can just add on charges, add on charges, add on charges. So now you're afraid, oh man, I don't want to take the risk of going to prison, because it's the burden of proof is on you or your lawyer, who could be a court-assigned lawyer who's got too many cases. He can't get into everything. So there's a chance if you go to court, you're going to get 25 years, 30 years or more for some minor cases of drug sale or drug use. And this has been proven. We'll talk about that next time. So now people of color in some of our poorest communities are subject to this and preyed upon by this whole racial injustice judicial system and penal system that was built on our past, connects to our present, and will control our future if we don't educate ourselves and do something about it. That's our job as Christians. That's our job as the church if we want equality in this country. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Please hit like and subscribe. Let your friends know about this channel so we can get our subscribers up. And also, the main thing, the truth you know will set you free. The truth should not stop with you. As we share this and we have these conversations with friends, even people who don't look like you, even people who don't agree with you, have these discussions, because that's how the truth gets out and that's how it grows. If not, it stops with us. It can die with us, and then the enemy wins. Be blessed. Stay strong. Push for racial equality. God bless you.